The room was silent, except for the soft hum of the ceiling fans. Every pair of alien eyes in the hall was fixed on Ryan. He stood in the center of the large chamber, feeling the heat of their stares burn into his back. The tall figure at the far end, his boss, loomed behind a massive glass desk. The alien's crimson eyes glowed with anger, his sharp mandibles twitching in barely controlled rage. In his deep, rumbling voice, he accused Ryan of being caught in a private room with his daughter, Lyra. The words hit like a punch. Gasps rippled through the crowd of employees, some whispering, others smirking, as if they had been waiting for this kind of scandal. Ryan's hands curled into fists. He wanted to defend himself, but Lyra stood near the wall, her face pale, her lips pressed tightly together. She didn't speak, didn't deny it, didn't explain. Her green, iridescent eyes stayed locked on him. There was something in her gaze, fear mixed with a strange urgency. He realized she was trying to tell him something without words. The alien boss slammed a clawed hand against the desk. "Humans are forbidden from private contact with my family," he said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You will be punished." The security guards, both twice Ryan's size, stepped forward. Their metal armor clinked with each heavy step. Ryan could see the faint blue glow of their stun weapons. He knew that if they took him, he might never come back. Lyra's fingers twitched at her side, making a small, almost invisible gesture. Ryan recognized it. It was a signal they used during emergency drills, meaning danger, but not from who everyone thought. His heartbeat quickened. If she was warning him, then this wasn't about a forbidden meeting. Something else was happening, something much bigger. He opened his mouth to speak, but the guards were already reaching for him. The crowd was leaning forward, eager to see a human humiliated. Ryan could hear their low murmurs. "I knew it. Humans can't be trusted. She's too high caste for him." Every word made his skin prickle with heat. Just as one guard's hand clamped on Ryan's shoulder, a deep rumble shook the floor. A low, building roar filled the hall. The glass walls rattled violently. Then, with a deafening crack, an explosion tore through the outer side of the building. Shards of glass rained down, alarms screamed, and the scent of burning metal filled the air. The impact threw several people off their feet. The lights flickered, plunging the room into brief darkness before emergency strips along the floor lit up in red. Smoke curled in from the shattered wall, and Ryan could see flickers of orange fire outside. The guards turned their heads toward the chaos for just a second, but that was enough. Lyra darted forward, grabbed Ryan's arm, and hissed, "Move!" Ryan didn't hesitate. He followed her as she pulled him toward a side door, weaving through overturned chairs and scattering papers. Behind them, the boss was shouting orders, his voice barely audible over the alarms. The guards realized too late what was happening. They pushed into a narrow service corridor lit by weak, flickering lights. The air smelled of ozone and dust. Ryan's mind raced. "Why are you helping me?" he demanded in a harsh whisper as they ran. Lyra glanced back, her expression fierce. "Because if you stay, they'll kill you. And me." Her words hit like another explosion in his chest. He didn't have time to ask more. The sound of boots pounded behind them. Security, maybe, or something worse. Lyra yanked open a maintenance hatch, and they slipped inside, the metal echoing under their steps as they descended into the guts of the building. Ryan's pulse was still racing from the accusation, from the stares, from the strange mix of shame and confusion. But now there was something else. Cold, sharp fear. He didn't know what had really just happened, but he knew one thing. Whatever the truth was, it was dangerous enough to make Lyra break her silence. Dangerous enough to risk everything. They kept moving through the dim corridors as the building above groaned from the damage. Somewhere in the distance, a deeper alarm began to sound, one Ryan had never heard before. It wasn't the standard evacuation tone. It was a warning. Something worse was coming. Lyra tightened her grip on his wrist and whispered, "Don't stop. Not for anything." The metal hatch clanged shut behind them, sealing out most of the noise from the chaos above. The air in the service tunnel was damp and cold, and every sound of their footsteps echoed off the narrow walls. Dim yellow lights flickered overhead, casting moving shadows as they hurried forward. Ryan's heart was still pounding from the explosion, from the accusation, from the eyes of everyone in that hall judging him. Lyra moved fast, her long cloak swishing around her legs, her breathing quick but steady. You need to tell me what's going on, Ryan said in a low, tense voice. One minute I'm being accused, the next there's an explosion and you're dragging me through a tunnel. Lyra didn't slow down. If I tell you now, you'll start asking more questions, and we don't have time. Someone is hunting me. Her tone was sharp, almost panicked, but her eyes kept scanning every corner ahead. Ryan frowned, trying to keep up. And the part where I was caught with you? He asked. She glanced at him quickly, her jaw tightening. That was staged. They wanted to make it look like you were compromising me, so my father would be distracted. If they're busy dealing with you, they can move against him without anyone noticing. Ryan almost tripped over a loose pipe. They? Who are they? She didn't answer. Instead, she pressed her hand against a wall panel, and a hidden door slid open, revealing a dark maintenance tunnel lined with thick cables. The hum of machinery filled the air. As they stepped inside, Ryan noticed small blinking lights along the floor. Drones, Lyra whispered. A faint whirring sound echoed behind them. Ryan turned his head and caught sight of two hovering machines moving toward them, their spherical bodies covered with dark armor plating. Each had a pair of glowing red eyes and a weapon mount that looked like a small plasma blaster. Not security? Ryan asked, hoping he was wrong. Lyra shook her head. No, assassins. Before Ryan could react, the lead drone accelerated, the hum turning into a sharp buzz. Lyra shoved him against the wall, just as a thin beam of blue light sliced past where his head had been. Ryan's instincts kicked in. He reached into his tool belt, pulling out a compact electromagnetic disruptor, something used for fixing alien machinery. Cover me, he said. Lyra's expression showed a flicker of surprise, but she stepped in front of him, drawing a slim blade from her belt. The drone fired again, but Lyra's movements were quick and sharp, blocking the shot with a sudden swing of her blade that sent sparks into the air. Ryan crouched, twisting a dial on the disruptor, then aimed it at the drone. A pulse of electric energy shot out, hitting the machine square in its center. The drone froze midair, its lights flickering before it dropped to the floor with a dull clang. The second drone hesitated for only a second before spinning toward Ryan. He dove behind a cable pillar, the plasma beam scorching the wall beside him. Lyra leapt forward, slashing across the drone's sensor eyes, sending it spiraling into the tunnel wall. It sparked violently before collapsing. The smell of burnt electronics filled the air. Ryan stood up, still gripping the disruptor tightly. Lyra looked at him, breathing hard. For someone accused of what they accused you of, you fight surprisingly well. Her voice held a hint of something. Maybe respect, maybe curiosity. He shrugged. I fix machines, and sometimes to fix them, you need to break them first. She gave a faint, humorless smile, then motioned for him to follow. They moved quickly through the tunnel, the hum of the drones fading behind them. After several turns, the tunnel opened into a grated walkway overlooking a massive underground chamber filled with pipes, steam vents, and more service corridors. The sound of rushing water echoed around them. Lyra stopped at the railing, scanning the shadows below. We can't stay here, she said. The explosion was meant as a distraction, but if they've already deployed assassins, that means they're moving faster than I thought. Ryan leaned against the railing, catching his breath. I'm not going anywhere until you tell me why they want you dead, and why I'm in the middle of this. She looked down for a moment, her hands gripping the railing. I found something I shouldn't have. A coded transmission meant for my father's most trusted advisor. It wasn't about business. It was a message to trigger a coup. They want my father removed, permanently. When I intercepted it, they saw me. I didn't have time to hide it, so I ran. And then, you arrived to fix the comms in my private office. You became the perfect scapegoat. Ryan blinked. So all of this, me being accused, dragged into a public scene, that was to cover their tracks? She nodded. And to keep my father's attention away from what's really happening. Footsteps echoed from the far side of the chamber. Ryan spotted 3 figures in heavy armor moving along the opposite walkway. The glint of their weapons in the dim light was unmistakable. We need to move, he said, already backing toward a side passage. Lyra led him down a spiral staircase that seemed to go on forever, the metal steps creaking under their weight. At the bottom, they stepped into the lower levels of the city, a place Ryan had only heard about in rumors. Narrow alleys between massive support beams, dripping pipes overhead, the smell of rust and stale water in the air. They passed by a cluster of alien workers who barely glanced at them, too busy haggling over crates of strange fruit. Somewhere above, the sound of distant alarms still echoed faintly. Ryan knew they were still being hunted. Lyra slowed down as they approached a dimly lit doorway. The sign above it was written in an alien script Ryan couldn't read. "This place is safe," she said quietly. "For now." She pushed the door open, and they stepped into a small, cluttered hostel lobby. An elderly alien with cloudy eyes sat behind the counter, his wrinkled hands folded in front of him. Without speaking, the old alien tilted his head toward a narrow hallway. Lyra guided Ryan to a small room with a single bed and a cracked window. She closed the door behind them and leaned against it, finally letting out a shaky breath. Ryan sat on the edge of the bed, looking at her. "You know," he said, "a little warning would have been nice before dragging me into a conspiracy." Her lips twitched into a tired half-smile. "If I had warned you, you might have said no." Ryan met her eyes. "And now?" She looked away, her voice low. "Now it's too late to say no." The room was small and cold, the single dim light above them swaying gently with the movement of the building. Ryan sat on the edge of the bed, still feeling the tension in his chest from running and fighting. Lyra stayed by the door, her hand resting on the handle as if she expected someone to burst in at any moment. Outside, the muffled sounds of the lower city drifted through the cracked window, distant shouts, clattering machinery, the hum of traffic far above. Ryan finally broke the silence. "So you're saying this is all because you found some message?" Lyra turned to face him, her eyes sharp. "Not just some message. It's proof of a coup, a plan to overthrow my father, take control of the company, and then the planet." She moved away from the door and sat opposite him, leaning forward. "The conspirators aren't just after my family. They have enough influence to change the entire power structure here." Ryan rubbed his face with both hands. "And me? I'm just an engineer. I fix ships, I fix systems. I'm not part of your politics." Lyra's gaze didn't waver. "You are now. You were in my office when they saw me take the data. That means they can claim you were working with me, maybe even planning to use me to get to my father. They'll use that to make you disappear. And once you're gone, no one will ask questions." Her voice was steady, but Ryan could hear the edge of fear in it. She wasn't just worried for herself. She knew the danger they were both in. He leaned back against the wall, exhaling slowly. "You could have left me there," he said. "Would have been easier for you." Lyra shook her head. "That's not who I am." A faint knock on the door made both of them freeze. Lyra gestured for Ryan to stay silent. She opened the door a crack and looked out. An alien woman with a long scarf covering her face stood in the hallway, holding a small tray of steaming cups. Her eyes were pale and clouded, almost like the old man at the front desk. Without speaking, she handed the tray to Lyra and walked away. Lyra set it on the small table. "Tea," she said. "Don't worry, it's safe." Ryan picked up one of the cups, the warmth spreading through his fingers. "How long can we stay here?" Lyra shook her head. "Not long. If they tracked us to the tunnels, they'll track us here too. We'll need to move before nightfall." He sipped the tea, its sharp herbal taste filling his mouth. "You mentioned this message. Where is it now?" Lyra touched the inside of her coat, where Ryan noticed a faint bulge. "Hidden, encrypted, but I can't break the code. It's beyond me." Ryan thought for a moment. "I know someone, a human, lives in the outer district. He's not exactly legal, but if anyone can crack alien encryption, it's him." Lyra tilted her head. "And you trust him?" Ryan gave a small shrug. "As much as anyone in this city, which isn't much." A sudden noise outside the window made them both turn. Through the crack in the glass, Ryan saw movement in the alley, two figures standing just out of the light, watching the building. One lifted a small device to his face, scanning the upper floors. Ryan moved away from the window quickly. "We've been found." Lyra was already on her feet, pulling the hood of her cloak over her head. "Then we move now." She opened the door, peeking into the hallway before stepping out. The corridor was empty, except for the faint creak of the floorboards. They moved quickly, heading toward the back exit. The old alien at the counter didn't stop them, but Ryan noticed his head tilt slightly, as if he could hear more than he let on. They slipped through the back door into a narrow passage between buildings. The smell of damp metal and engine oil filled the air. Lyra moved with practiced speed, leading Ryan through a maze of alleys and half-lit streets. As they turned a corner, a shadow moved in front of them. A tall alien man, his face hidden by a mask, blocking the path. Behind them, two more figures stepped into view. All three carried short, curved weapons that gleamed in the dim light. Ryan's stomach tightened. Lyra stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "We don't want trouble." The masked alien laughed, a low, unpleasant sound. "Then you shouldn't be walking in our streets, especially not with him." His gaze shifted to Ryan, the red glow of his visor making Ryan feel like a target. Without warning, one of the figures behind them lunged. Ryan reacted on instinct, sidestepping and shoving the attacker into the wall. Lyra spun to block the other, her blade flashing in the dark. The masked alien moved fast, swinging his weapon toward Ryan's head. Ryan ducked, grabbing a loose pipe from the ground and swinging it upward. The metal clanged against the attacker's wrist, forcing him back. Lyra's blade caught the faint light as she slashed across another attacker's arm, making him drop his weapon with a hiss of pain. The masked alien hesitated for a moment, then gave a sharp whistle. The group retreated into the shadows, disappearing as quickly as they had appeared. Ryan's breathing was heavy, his hands still tight around the pipe. "That's the second time in less than a day I've been attacked," he said. Lyra nodded grimly. "It won't be the last, which is why we can't stop moving." They continued through the maze of streets until they reached a dark overpass where the noise of the upper city hummed faintly above. Lyra stopped, looking at Ryan. "If your friend can break the code, we'll have proof. But once we do, we'll be hunted even harder. Are you sure you're ready for that?" Ryan met her gaze without hesitation. "I didn't ask for this, but I'm not running away, not if it means they win." Lyra's expression softened just slightly, a flicker of something like trust in her eyes. "Then let's go." They stepped into the shadows of the overpass, the city swallowing them whole as the hunt continued. The rain-slicked streets glistened under the pale light of the overhead lamps as Ryan and Lyra made their way toward the industrial district. The air was thick with the smell of hot metal and oil, and the hiss of steam vents echoed from the walls around them. Ryan kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see masked figures following them again. Lyra walked ahead, her cloak pulled tight, her movements swift and sure, as if she had every turn memorized. They stopped near a huge warehouse with faded signs in alien script. A single maintenance door stood half hidden between stacks of rusted cargo crates. Lyra tapped a code into the panel, and the door opened with a metallic groan. Inside was a dimly lit space filled with humming machinery, towering server racks, and rows of blinking lights. The air was cooler here, filled with the faint buzz of electronics. "This is it," Lyra whispered. "The data hub. The message is in the corporate server, deep in the mainframe. We need it before they wipe it." Ryan looked around, noting the cameras in the corners. "This place is locked down tighter than a warship. We can't just walk in." Lyra pulled out 2 utility vests from a storage bin. "We're not walking in. We're here as maintenance workers." She handed one to him. "You know how to look like you belong." Minutes later, they were moving through the corridors, heads down, carrying toolkits. The few workers they passed barely spared them a glance. Eventually, they reached the core server room, its reinforced door sealed with a heavy security lock. A pair of AI drones floated silently nearby, their sensors sweeping the area in steady arcs. Ryan crouched near the door's access panel, pretending to check wiring. "I can bypass this," he murmured, "but it'll trip a secondary alarm. We'll have minutes before they realize." Lyra scanned the hallway. "Do it." Ryan pulled out a small toolkit, his hands moving quickly and precisely. Sparks flickered as he rewired the panel, causing the drone's lights to dim for just a moment. He slipped a bypass chip into the slot, and the lock clicked open. The heavy door slid aside with a hiss. Inside, the server room glowed in shades of blue and green, the sound of cooling fans filling the air. Towering data racks stretched to the ceiling, each one covered in pulsing lights. Lyra moved toward a central console, inserting the data chip from her coat. "Keep watch," she told him. Ryan stood near the door, glancing between the hallway and the room. His mind raced. If they were caught here, there would be no talking their way out. Lyra's fingers flew over the console, her eyes focused. "I've got it," she said after a moment, "but the encryption is stronger than I thought. I can't crack it here." A sudden metallic clang behind them made Ryan whirl around. The door slammed shut, locking with a deep mechanical thud. A shimmering wall of energy rippled across the frame. It was a force field. Ryan's stomach sank. From the shadows at the far end of the room, a tall figure stepped forward. His armor gleamed black under the cold lights, his eyes hidden behind a visor. The voice that came from his helmet was low and calm. "I knew you would come here, Lyra." Lyra's expression hardened. "Commander Vask." The alien commander took a slow step closer. "You've caused quite the mess. Your father is unavailable at the moment. He'll be removed from power soon. And you." His gaze shifted toward Ryan. "You've been keeping strange company." Ryan's jaw tightened. "Funny, I was about to say the same about you." Vask ignored him, circling them like a predator. "You're both useful to me. The human will be executed, publicly, to show the dangers of mingling outside one's place. You, Lyra, will be kept under my protection. Safe, but silent." Lyra's voice was steady. "You mean a prisoner?" Vask smiled faintly. "A valuable one." He nodded toward the data chip still in the console. "And that belongs to me." Ryan glanced at Lyra, then at the floor near the far wall. He spotted a maintenance grate with faint scorch marks around the edges. If he could cut through it, they might have a way out. Slowly, without drawing attention, he reached into his vest for the compact plasma cutter he always carried. Vask kept talking, his voice dripping with arrogance. "The galaxy works on power, Lyra. Your father forgot that. I will remind everyone." Ryan crouched slightly, pretending to adjust his boot, but in reality, he powered up the cutter. A faint hiss filled the air as the tool's blade of light sliced into the metal floor. Lyra kept her attention on Vask, buying him seconds. "You'll fail," she told him, "because you underestimate people who aren't in your little circle of power." The grate came loose just as Vask stepped closer to her. Ryan lunged, grabbing Lyra's arm and pulling her toward the opening. Vask shouted, his hand going to his weapon, but Ryan kicked the loose grate into his legs, making him stumble. They dropped into the shaft below, the narrow space filled with the sound of rushing water and the distant roar of machinery. Above them, Vask's voice echoed through the room. "Find them?" The shaft was steep and the metal was slick, forcing them to half slide, half climb downward. Heat radiated from the massive pipes running along the walls. After a tense descent, they spilled out into a dim underground channel. Steam curled around them, and the sound of heavy machinery thumped through the walls. Lyra clutched the data chip against her chest. That was too close. Ryan glanced back at the dark tunnel they had come from. "Close doesn't matter. We're still breathing." They started moving again, deeper into the lower levels. Somewhere above, alarms were already spreading the news. They had been spotted. Ryan knew the commander wouldn't rest until they were caught, and now they had no choice but to keep running. The only thing between them and capture was the proof in Lyra's hands, and the hope that they could reach someone who could unlock it before Vask found them again. Cold water splashed into Ryan's face as they tumbled into the underground channel. The current was stronger than he expected, pulling at his legs and dragging him forward. Lyra surfaced beside him, coughing, her cloak heavy with water. The faint light from above glimmered on the moving surface, but most of the tunnel ahead was swallowed in darkness. The sound of rushing water echoed around them, making it hard to hear anything else. They swam with the current until the passage widened, then pulled themselves onto a slippery metal ledge. Ryan lay on his back for a moment, catching his breath, while Lyra pulled the data chip from inside her coat and checked it. Even soaked, she held it tightly as if it were more valuable than her own life. "Still intact," she said, relief in her voice. "If we lost this, everything we've done would be for nothing." Ryan sat up, shaking water from his hair. "We need to get out of here before they seal off the lower levels." He looked around, spotting a ladder that led upward. They climbed carefully, the rungs cold and rusted under their hands, until they reached a hatch. Ryan pushed it open slowly and peered out. They emerged into a shadowed dockyard, the kind of place that smelled of salt, oil, and rust. The floor was littered with broken crates and abandoned cargo nets. Old ships floated silently in the water, their hulls pitted and scarred from years of use. No one was in sight. Ryan climbed out first, then helped Lyra onto the dock. Lyra wrung out her cloak, shivering in the damp air. "We can't go to anyone official. The conspirators have too much reach." Ryan nodded. "That means we take it to someone who doesn't care about their rules." She tilted her head. "You mentioned a friend before, the one who can crack alien encryption?" Ryan gave a small smile. "Yeah, he's unconventional, but he owes me." They started walking along the dock, keeping close to the shadows. The distant hum of engines and faint voices carried through the still air. Ryan kept glancing around, expecting trouble at any moment. Halfway across the dockyard, Lyra suddenly froze. Ryan followed her gaze and spotted 3 dark shapes moving between the cargo containers. Their movements were smooth, calculated. "Assassins again," Ryan muttered. The first shadow broke into a sprint, charging toward them. Ryan shoved Lyra toward the side, pulling his plasma cutter from his belt. The attacker lunged, swinging a short blade, but Ryan ducked and slammed the cutter's handle into the alien's ribs. The hiss of energy filled the air as the weapon activated, leaving a scorched mark on the attacker's armor. Lyra had drawn her own blade, meeting the second assassin with a quick, precise strike. Metal clashed, sparks flying in the dim light. She spun, her cloak flaring as she forced her opponent back. The third assassin tried to flank her, but Ryan intercepted, tackling him into a pile of crates. The crates splintered under the impact, spilling strange glowing stones across the ground. The assassin scrambled to his feet, but Ryan swung the plasma cutter upward, catching the alien's weapon arm and sending the blade clattering away. The first attacker was already retreating, pulling the second with him. The third gave Ryan one last glare before following. They vanished into the shadows, their footsteps fading quickly. Breathing hard, Ryan glanced at Lyra. "They're getting desperate." Lyra nodded. "That means we're getting close to something they don't want us to find." They moved on quickly, leaving the dockyard behind. Ryan led her through narrow back streets, past old storage buildings and flickering street lamps, until they reached a large metal gate. The paint was peeling, and a faded sign hung crookedly above it. Ryan knocked twice, then once more after a pause. A small slot in the gate slid open, revealing a pair of suspicious eyes. "Ryan?" a voice rasped. "Need a favor," Ryan replied. The gate creaked open and they stepped inside. The courtyard beyond was cluttered with old machinery, half-disassembled ships, and heaps of salvaged tech. A thin man with messy hair and oil-stained clothes stood there, wiping his hands on a rag. "You always bring trouble," the man said, eyeing Lyra with curiosity. Ryan grinned faintly. "This is Lyra, and this," he tapped the pocket where she kept the chip, "needs decoding." The man raised an eyebrow. "Alien encryption?" "The heavy kind," Ryan confirmed. "Can you do it?" The man's smile was crooked but confident. "Give me a few hours." Lyra hesitated, then handed over the chip. The man examined it under the light, whistling softly. "Whatever's on here, someone didn't want it seen." Ryan leaned against the wall, still catching his breath. "That's why we need it opened." The man disappeared into a side room, leaving them in the quiet hum of the workshop. Lyra stood near the door, watching the street beyond the gate. Her voice was low when she spoke. "If he cracks it, we'll have the proof. But once that happens, they'll stop trying to catch us quietly." Ryan nodded slowly. "Then we make sure they never get the chance." Outside, the wind carried the distant wail of sirens. Ryan knew it wouldn't be long before trouble found them again. And when it did, they would have to be ready. The hours passed slowly in the workshop, the only sounds coming from the constant tapping of keys and the soft hum of machines. Ryan paced near the workbench while Lyra stayed close to the door, her eyes scanning every shadow outside the gate. The smell of engine oil and hot metal filled the air, mixing with the faint scent of rain drifting in from the street. Ryan's friend, Darren, sat in front of a glowing screen, his fingers moving fast, his brow furrowed in concentration. "This encryption isn't normal corporate security," Darren muttered. "It's layered military-grade code. Whoever made this wanted to make sure no one could open it without the right key." Lyra's voice was calm but firm. "Can you break it?" Darren gave a small grin. "I can break anything. The question is whether you're ready for what's inside." Ryan stepped closer, his patience wearing thin. "Just get it done. We don't have much time." Outside, the sound of engines rumbled in the distance, fading and then growing louder again. Lyra glanced at Ryan, a silent warning passing between them. They both knew it could be a patrol or worse, assassins tracking them here. Finally, after what felt like hours, Darren leaned back in his chair. "Got it," he said, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction. The screen displayed a series of alien symbols, followed by clear text. He began reading it aloud. The message revealed names, high-ranking officials in Lyra's father's company, and members of the Planetary Council. It detailed their plan to remove her father from power, blame him for fabricated crimes, and take control of the company's assets. But that wasn't all. The message also showed evidence of secret deals with off-world criminal networks, agreements to sell technology that could destabilize entire colonies. Lyra's hands tightened into fists as she read over Darren's shoulder. "This is enough to destroy them," she said quietly. "If the public sees this, they'll have no choice but to act." Ryan nodded, but his mind was already calculating the danger, which means they'll kill us before we get the chance. Before anyone could speak again, a loud crash echoed from the gate outside. Darren shot to his feet. "That's not the wind." Ryan grabbed his plasma cutter, motioning for Lyra to move to the side of the doorway. The gate shuddered again, the metal groaning under the force of repeated impacts. Voices barked orders outside, deep, commanding, and urgent. The third strike blew the gate open, sending shards of metal flying across the courtyard. Armed figures poured in, their armor marked with the insignia of the conspirators. The first one raised a weapon, but Ryan fired the cutter's energy beam, forcing him to dive aside. Lyra darted forward, her blade flashing as she engaged the second attacker. Darren ducked behind a stack of crates, clutching the data chip like his life depended on it. Ryan fought to keep them away from Darren, striking at any who got close. But there were too many. One attacker broke through and seized Darren by the collar, yanking him into the open. The man's weapon was already aimed at Darren's chest when a sudden shot rang out. Lyra had thrown a small, curved dagger, embedding it in the attacker's wrist. The weapon clattered to the floor. "Move!" Ryan shouted. Darren scrambled toward the back exit, clutching the chip. Ryan and Lyra followed, covering him as they wove through the narrow storage aisles. Blasts of energy lit up the shadows, the heat from each shot brushing against Ryan's skin. They reached the back door, but it was locked with a heavy chain. Ryan swung the plasma cutter, slicing through the metal with a shower of sparks. They burst into the alley beyond, the rain hitting them in cold sheets. The narrow street twisted between tall, crumbling buildings. Darren ran ahead, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Lyra kept looking back, making sure the attackers hadn't caught up yet. But the sound of pounding footsteps grew louder. They were still being chased. At the end of the alley, the street opened into a crowded market square, the air thick with steam from food stalls, and the chatter of dozens of voices. Ryan grabbed Lyra's arm and pulled her into the crowd, weaving between vendors and customers. The attackers spilled into the square moments later, scanning the sea of faces. They made it to the far side without being spotted, ducking into a shadowed doorway. Ryan could feel the tension in his muscles, the constant readiness to fight or run. Lyra's eyes were still on the crowd, searching for any sign of pursuit. "We can't keep running like this," Ryan said. "We need to make our move now. If we don't, they'll corner us again." Lyra nodded slowly. "We get to the communications tower. We send the message to everyone. Once it's out, they can't stop it." Darren, still clutching the chip, looked between them. "That's suicide. The tower's in the middle of the corporate district. It's crawling with guards." Ryan gave a grim smile. "Then we make sure they're too busy to notice us until it's too late." The rain continued to fall, masking their movements as they slipped away from the market. Ryan knew the danger was only going to get worse from here. But the choice was already made. They would take the fight straight to the heart of the enemy, no matter the cost. The festival lights painted the night sky in shifting colors as music and laughter filled the streets. Crowds moved between stalls selling food, trinkets, and glowing lanterns. It was the perfect cover for Ryan, Lyra, and Darren as they made their way toward the towering communications spire in the center of the district. The spire rose high above the surrounding buildings, its glass panels catching every light and reflecting them like a beacon. Ryan kept his hood low, his eyes scanning the festival goers for any sign of the enemy. Lyra walked beside him, her cloak blending into the moving crowd. Darren trailed just behind, carrying the small device with the decoded message stored inside. The closer they got, the more guarded the streets became. Uniformed patrols stood at intersections, scanning faces, while surveillance drones floated silently overhead. They reached a checkpoint near the base of the spire, where a group of guards was checking identification. Ryan didn't slow. Instead, he turned sharply into a side street, leading them into a narrow service alley that smelled faintly of burning oil. At the far end was a maintenance hatch, half hidden behind a vendor's stall. "This is our way in," Ryan said, glancing around to make sure they weren't being watched. He knelt and pulled a small tool from his belt, working quickly to bypass the hatch lock. It clicked open, revealing a dim stairwell leading upward. Inside, the air was cooler and quieter, the sounds of the festival fading to a dull murmur. The stairwell led them into the spire's maintenance corridors, a maze of pipes, cables, and metal walkways. The glow from the city below spilled through occasional glass panels, casting faint patterns of light across the floor. They moved quickly, following Ryan's memory of the spire's schematics. Every few minutes, they paused to listen for footsteps or the hum of approaching drones. The tension was heavy, but no one spoke. Finally, they reached the control room near the top of the spire. Through a reinforced glass wall, they could see rows of consoles and a massive central terminal connected to the broadcast system. 2 guards stood inside, chatting idly, their weapons slung casually at their sides. Ryan nodded to Lyra, who slipped silently along the wall. In one fluid motion, she disarmed the first guard, twisting his weapon away before he could react. Ryan tackled the second, pinning him against the console until he dropped his weapon. Within moments, both guards were unconscious on the floor. Darren hurried to the terminal, his fingers flying over the controls. "I can upload the data," he said, "but once it starts, they'll know exactly where we are." Lyra positioned herself near the door, her blade ready. "Then we hold them off until it's done." Ryan stood beside her, watching the hallway beyond. The hum of the broadcast system grew louder as Darren worked, and then a series of beeps signaled the final stage of the upload. On the screens, the incriminating documents began flashing one after another. Names, plans, secret communications, all spilling into the planetary network. An alarm blared, red lights flooding the control room. "They're coming," Lyra warned. The first wave of guards arrived within seconds, weapons raised. Ryan ducked behind a console, firing quick bursts from a guard's discarded blaster. Lyra moved like a shadow, striking fast and disappearing behind cover before they could target her. The narrow doorway worked in their favor, forcing the attackers to come in one at a time. Darren's voice was urgent. 30 more seconds! Another guard tried to flank them through a side panel, but Ryan saw him and slammed the hatch shut, locking it with a manual bolt. The room was thick with the smell of scorched metal and the sharp tang of ozone from the blaster fire. 10 seconds! Darren shouted. One last guard forced his way into the doorway, swinging a heavy baton. Lyra stepped in close, catching his arm and flipping him to the ground with a swift motion. She didn't pause. She turned to Ryan and shouted, "It's done!" Darren hit the final command, and the screens all switched to a single broadcast signal. Every public display across the planet lit up with the evidence, images, documents, and voice recordings exposing the coup leaders and their crimes. The message was clear, undeniable, and everywhere at once. For a heartbeat, the room was silent except for the hum of the equipment. Then a loud explosion rocked the spire. Someone had triggered a desperate attempt to destroy the control center. Time to go. Ryan grabbed Darren's arm, pulling him toward the maintenance corridor. Lyra covered their retreat, striking down one last guard before following. They raced through the twisting passages, the sound of alarms and distant shouts chasing them down the stairwells. When they finally emerged into the festival crowd again, the mood had changed. People were no longer laughing. They were staring at the giant screens overhead, reading the truth for themselves. Murmurs turned into angry shouts as the scale of the conspiracy became clear. In the chaos, Ryan, Lyra, and Darren slipped away. By the time they reached a quiet side street, news was already spreading. Loyal forces had freed Lyra's father, and the coup leaders were being hunted down. Lyra turned to Ryan, her eyes softer than he'd ever seen them. "You risked everything for someone you barely knew." Ryan gave a small smile. Sometimes things aren't as they seem. She looked at him for a long moment before answering. And sometimes that's a good thing. The night air was cool as they walked away from the noise and light of the festival. They didn't know what the future held, but for now, the truth was free, and the people who had tried to bury it would pay the price.